Alright, so I want to make a video updating everyone as usual and then get into some other important stuff. And getting right into it here, Canada's up to 72,586 confirmed cases, 5,338 dead. Alberta is up to 6,457 confirmed cases, although we're up to we're down to 1,131 active cases. Now, we're having about 150 people around there. Usually, actually, it's been over 100 for the last few days at least. More people recover than actually get the virus. Now, the first thing I'll point out is that I'll probably stop even talking about this. Like I say, probably, I don't know yet. Within the next week or so, because we're almost at the point to where it's so obvious that it's not even worth talking. I mean, we already are at that point, but now that things are open, or at least somewhat, and not to mention too, a lot of people have been ignoring it for the last couple weeks, maybe even a little more, depending on who you talk to. Like I say, we're at the point to where most people, aside from the Karens of the world, we're all gonna, if we don't keep things locked down, we're all gonna die crowd, which is a minority, but they're a very loud minority, so they appear like they're a bigger percentage than they actually are. Um, a lot of people aren't even following it anyway. And like I said, there's no evidence that it works in the first place. Like I talked about the story the other day, 2/3 of people testing positive for the virus in New York are people that were self-quarantining. Again, Sweden's death rate, the amount of deaths in Sweden, this is an average year. Even though their death rate is a little bit higher than the average throughout the world, they've still had a very average amount of people die in up until this point in the calendar year. So not to mention we've had states, South Dakota never even fully closed, I believe. Georgia's been open for a few weeks. There's no evidence whatsoever, none whatsoever. If any, it's largely anecdotal that the lockdown has anything more than a very small percent. We're talking probably single digit percent difference in the rate of spread and the rate of death compared to locking things down versus not locking things down. And it really, really disappoints me that we're still, tiptoeing along in Alberta. Like what are we doing? Like what are we doing? And it's very obvious that even the Alberta government, although they are conservative, at least in name, a lot of it is in name only, they're still trying to grab power as well. I mean, the Trudeau government's going full tilt, pedal to the metal. We want as much power, as much socialism, as much of everything as we can possibly get. The Kenny government is doing that as well. I would say not to quite the same degree, but they're doing it as well, and it's something that's very concerning. And the even more concerning thing is that they're definitely losing support, and rightfully so, and not for the reasons that the crazy leftist we want socialism crowd complains about. It's that they're trying to pander way too much to the left, basically. And by the left, I mean they're not actually really being conservative. Like, just be conservative. Like, if you actually believe in your values, you would have reopened by now, too, I guess, is the main point I'm trying to talk about. Like I say, there's no evidence that there's anything significant. Like I say, if you want to have this whole we're going to reopen Calgary later, whatever, I still vehemently disagree with it. But Edmonton has 63 active cases, for God's sake. Like, what are we doing? We have 63 active cases in a population area of over 1 million people. Like, we're talking like in it's so. And like I said, we have 7 people in the hospital aside from Calgary. We have what, 16 people in the hospital right now. Like, what are we doing? We have 16 people in the hospital in the whole province aside from Calgary. That's out of about what, 3.5 million people. We got 16 people in the hospital. That's what we're so worried about. Like, oh my, like, wow. The lengths or sorry, the amount of BS the government can get away with this whole situation absolutely astounds me. And the thing that, I mean, it doesn't, the other thing that doesn't necessarily astound me, because I've come to realize this kind of stuff and, getting more politically active, is the extent that people will go to go against their own self-interest. Like I say, the government could come out and tell people that, yeah, you were taken in on the trains to the concentration camps, and that's going to be for your safety. And a lot of people would get on those trains, a lot of people, and that percentage is much higher than the average person thinks. Like I say, uh, it's the classic Milgram experiment example that, when I first heard that, the estimators thought that it would be an incredibly low number. Well, when I first heard that, I thought, yeah, it'll be like 80-90%, and sure enough, I think it was like three-quarters of people did it enough to kill people. And let's like to say, the vast majority of the population are just sheep. They'll do whatever the government tells them. They'll do whatever authority tells them. Again, there's no evidence whatsoever that the lockdown works, but yet you still have a very large percent of the population that still believes in it, even though the evidence points towards we shouldn't even have done it in the first place, let alone still be doing it. So I guess that's kind of the first thing I wanted to point out here. Getting into some other important stuff here. So yesterday, Justin Trudeau was talking to Canadians about how we should buy Canadian. You should buy Canadian products. But yet this lady here responds with saying, "Today Trudeau told us to buy Canadian. Why are we buying foreign oil for $20 billion then?" I think we bring in about 500,000 barrels a day in oil on average from the Saudis, largely, I believe. Again, don't quote me on that, but it's a very, very large number. I mean, basically all of Eastern Canada gets their oil from the Saudis. Western Canada, I believe, uses good old Canadian oil at least. But again, if buying Canadian is so important, then why aren't we doing that with one of the largest Canadian industries, an industry that employs hundreds of thousands, or indirectly or directly employs hundreds of thousands of Canadians? Like, why aren't we doing that? You want to, you know, have people to buy Canadian, shirts or shoes, which maybe employ what, like 1,000 people if you're lucky. Uh, but not an industry that employs hundreds of thousands of people. Like, come on, it's so, like their hatred of the free market and of people who believe in the free market, and by default, Alberta and Saskatchewan, is so obvious. Like I say, the people that still, like, the people from Alberta and Saskatchewan that still defend um, the federal government and the idea of a not having a Wexit movement. Like I say, it makes no sense whatsoever. And it's like I brought up too, that literally nobody should not support a Wexit movement, for the simple fact that if you're on the right, well, then it's going to benefit you, because we're going to have an actual free market for once. Again, we've never had a free, or at least not in a long time, not in most people's lifetimes. We've never had an actual, well, probably not in literally anybody's lifetime. We've never had a free market. We've never had actual capitalism. If Alberta and or Saskatchewan and or any other province that wanted to come left Canada, we could most likely have that. Now, like I said, there's a lot of other caveats that I don't want to get into in this video, but we could have that. And for all the people that want socialism in Alberta and Saskatchewan, like I say, there isn't exactly a shortage of them too. People think that Alberta is this incredibly right-leaning province, which in the rural areas it is, but in Edmonton and Calgary it isn't. Um, like I say, those people, you could have your socialism. Like I say, imagine what would the election have looked like last election if Alberta and Saskatchewan hadn't been in it? Like, the Liberals would have won by almost 100 seats probably. The elections in Canada, if Alberta and Saskatchewan left Canada, would literally come down to the socialist versus liberals. And by liberals, I don't even mean traditional liberals. I mean, like, we're not socialists, but we're close to it. Like, we at least want somewhat of a mixed economy. So again, you claim to want socialism so bad. You claim to want, this public health and public school. And we want infinite amounts of money. Like, money grows on trees. Therefore, the fact that you don't want to give public schools and public education unlimited amounts of money just goes to show you're a Nazi. Like I said, that's literally what these people believe. Again, they think that money grows on trees. And like I say, don't tell me that you don't, because if you don't, you wouldn't believe in the concept of free healthcare and unlimited amounts of public spending. Because if money's finite, then we can't just keep spending more and more and more and more and more. Like I say, you believe that we can keep spending more and more and more and more. But anyway, that's a different topic in and of itself. But like I say, if you want your socialism, great. Vote for Wexit. Move anywhere other than Alberta and Saskatchewan. You have socialism. You're good to go. But like I say, they know in the back of their head that, like I say, the the classic saying with socialism, eventually you run out of other people's money, and the entire system goes belly up. So again, that's a bit of a rant, but again, I wanted to point that out. So, like I say, if buying Canadian is so important, why aren't we buying Canadian oil? You just wanted to point that out. This is from Lucian Scott. And this is a story that came out or sorry, I believe it was yesterday or the day before, and it's a little bit unrelated, but I wanted to talk about it anyway because it's important. The government quietly announced the purchase of 272 rifles for the military amid its announcement to confiscate yours. Thing is, they paid $8.5 million for those rifles. That's $31,000, 250. Sorry, $31,000, 250 uh, per rifle. I want to follow the money on this deal now. Anybody who knows anything about guns knows that I would say that it's probably borderline impossible to spend that much money on a gun if you literally tried. I mean, if you did literally try, you probably could, but being realistic, those appear to be semi-automatic, probably 308s. I don't know what caliber they would be. I definitely doubt they're definitely not 50 BMGs or 338 Lapuas or some crazy cartridge like that. So you could probably buy a good semi-auto in a 30 cal 6.5 whatever caliber they got it in. Again, I don't know. You could probably buy that rifle for 2 or 3 grand tops. You could get a very high quality rifle for like 3 grand. Scopes, you're looking at maybe another 2-3 grand. All of the other accessories, maybe another 1,000. So you're looking at maybe $7,000-8,000 tops per rifle. Maybe you could stretch that out for 10, just for labor and all that kind of stuff. So like I say, maybe like I say, you can spend upwards of. I've seen guys with $20,000 rifles, or at least heard of them. Never seen any. $20,000 guns, but again, those are like super high quality custom 50 BMGs with literally, or like 338 Lapuas with literally like $5,000, like the most expensive scopes you can possibly buy. Um, so again, there's clearly a lot of shady stuff going on. Now, what's going on here? My guess is that whoever this contractor was is in bed with the government, and they're probably charging a 200-300% markup. Like I say, these things cost maybe 10 grand max, so they're taking home probably, let's just call it a conservative estimate, $20,000 a rifle for 272 rifles. That is a massive amount of money. So my guess is that it's the classic we'll scratch your back, you scratch our back scenario again. Whoever this contractor is getting a nice little kickback, they'll probably donate some of it to the Trudeau Foundation or some other, leftist cause, and boom, boom, we'll unjustly enrich you, you unjustly enrich us. And again, where's all these leftists complaining about corporate greed and all this kind of stuff that they rail about? Like, where is this? Where's the outrage? I thought you don't like corporate greed. I thought you don't like this kind of stuff. Now again, they only are against it when the right does it. Of course, it's so blatantly obvious. But anyway, like I say, I wanted to point this out because someone just got very rich for no particular reason. Now, again, if you want to mark it up a little bit, you should be able to mark up your product a little bit, but marking it up 300, 200%, 300% is, especially for something like this. If you want to make, 1,000, 2,000 bucks per rifle, that's probably realistic, but like 20,000, that's completely unrealistic. And I guarantee you that if you would have put this up to the open market, that someone would have came in, someone would have did it for 10,000 again. I pretty much guarantee it. Now I'm not a gunsmith or a defense contractor. I can't tell you exactly, but I know you can get you could easily get a high quality semi-auto with high quality optics and everything for 10 grand, absolutely, for sure. I guarantee you could. I mean, you could do it for 5 grand if you really wanted. But like I say, something fishy is going on here. So again, I just wanted to point that out. Um, so suicide rates are climbing for Nova Scotia men. Now, this would be probably all men, but again, I just came across this story specifically, and I wanted to talk a little bit about it. Now, uh, this is the whole crisis here is probably going to hit men a little harder than women. Number one, because I believe men are more likely to die from it. Number two is men tend to be more reliant on their income to get by. Again, women more likely to not work, more likely to not make as much, not because of sexism, because of reality. Um, and like I say, we know the gender pay gap is BS. I've talked about it in several videos. So again, men have more to lose when it comes to this kind of stuff. Not to mention men not nearly as likely to be recognized for mental health issues. At least, men significantly more likely to commit suicide. But yet, when have we ever heard any, governing body talk about how that's an issue we have to deal with? And like I say, the thing that I would point out is that if women committed suicide at, 3-4 times the rate of men, I guarantee you, bet every dollar I have that especially the Trudeau government would be railing about how big of an issue this is and how we have to deal with it. But yet when it's men, nobody cares. So again, that's something that we should be dealing with as a society. But again, because society is so feminist, there's such a feminine bias, and like I say, there isn't really much of a debate when it comes to that. We're a society run largely upon emotion. Women significantly more likely to, when a negative stimuli comes along, react with emotion rather than logic. So it's pretty much the only evidence you need to back that up. But like I said, it's something we should be dealing with. So last thing I wanted to talk about here is Canada lifts freeze on military exports to Saudi Arabia amid the virus pandemic. Now, this is something that happened about a month ago, but again, I just came across it again recently, so I wanted to talk about it. And this doesn't make any sense. I mean, for several reasons. Number one, the government claims to care so much about saving lives, but yet they're perfectly fine with selling arms to a country that kills gays, kills women who don't submit to Sharia law. A lot of this goes to funding terrorism. Again, we buy oil from the Saudis, which a lot of it ends up going to fund terrorism. We claim to care so much about saving lives, but we're willing to spend billions of dollars to save one life a year for this gun ban, but yet we don't care about saving lives all of a sudden when it means we can make a quick buck. So this just goes to show just how little the Canadian government, like I say, the federal Liberals actually care about this kind of stuff. Again, they claim to care about gay rights, but again, they give a government billions of dollars in profit a year from their oil. They give a government so they can oppress gays, oppress women, again, which they claim to care so much. Again, according to these people, Sharia law is not as bad as the oppressive patriarchy that exists in society today, which again there's no evidence of, but an actual patriarchy they don't care about. Again, society is so homophobic nowadays, but yet the last time I checked, there isn't it's not illegal to be gay. Gays aren't being killed and/or thrown in prison for being gay in Canada or the States, but which they are in most of these Muslim countries. All of a sudden, gay rights isn't a priority. All of a sudden, women's rights isn't a priority. All of a sudden, saving lives isn't a priority. I thought did I thought don't all lives matter? Like, why does the life of a Canadian matter more than a life of someone in Saudi Arabia? I mean, I don't believe it does, especially when we have control over it. I mean, when we don't have control over it, well, there's nothing really we can do. But this is something that we have control over. If we stop buying oil from them, that's less money that they could use towards funding terrorism, towards killing gays, and towards oppressing women. So again, if you actually care about this kind of stuff, you would actually want to have Canada use solely its own oil and to not sell them arms. But again, the leftists, they don't actually care about this kind of stuff. Like I say, it's obvious they don't actually care. They only care about virtue signaling, and they only care about it when they caring about it will hurt right wing causes. That's the only time that they actually care about it. So anyway, I'm gonna leave the video there. If you'd like to, make sure to like and subscribe. Check out my PayPal and email. I got linked in the description. I appreciate any donations, but at the very least, just hit that like and subscribe. And last a couple things, as always, check me out on Twitter if you haven't already. Check out my BitChute as well if you haven't already. Again, everything's in the description, so you can check it all out there.